Macrame design is an art on its own, and that is why in this video tutorial I will be showing you guys how to create beautiful macrame 3D designs with this comprehensive guide. It's Nicole here, and welcome back to Bochinat Macrame. I am super excited to be sharing with you guys my comprehensive guide on how to design macrame 3D projects. In this video, I will be walking you through the basics all the way up to things you really should pay attention to when coming up with your own macrame 3D designs. By following the steps that I will be sharing with you in this video, you will be able to macrame almost any object you see. So, what are you waiting for? Let's get started. Before we get into the tips on how to design 3D macrame projects, I want to preface these tips by saying that they are in no particular order. I definitely recommend going over these tips when designing 3D macrame projects, but in what particular order works with what suits you best. And let's get right into it. So the very first tip that you should definitely pay attention to when designing 3D macrame projects is to consider the overall shape of the object. What I mean by this is for a round object like the orange I am holding onto here will be made and designed differently than, say, a cubed object like the one I have here on the right. Something like this with a more boxed, squared-shaped object will be made differently because you will need different knots and different knotting techniques to form a shape like a cube compared to a round-shaped object. To create a round shape for macrame, you do have to start somewhere in the middle of the pattern with a few cords first and then continue adding cords partway through to get that round shape. It doesn't matter what kind of knots you choose to use to make the round object, but you do have to start somewhere in the middle and work your way outwards, which is different than, say, a cubed object because you do have to make it differently. What you would do for a pattern or design like this is you would make the squares separately and you would have to weave the sides together. Similar to how you would normally put a cube together, say if you were making it out of paper. This is the way that I would go about making a cube-like shape because you do want those sharper edges around to form that cube-like shape. And to do that, it is best to make the sides separately and then fuse those sides together by weaving. Another thing to consider when designing and making 3D macrame projects is to consider the lines on the object. You want to know the direction at which the lines run across your object to better help you at making a shape that closely resembles your object. So if you look at this pumpkin here, there are lines running down vertically. And there are little bumps in between the vertical lines at the top of the pumpkin because the pumpkin isn't exactly a circular shape. It is round, but there are other details with the shape that makes it look like a pumpkin. The macrame pattern on the left is what I originally made as a pumpkin. You can see here I have double half hitch knots that run horizontally. But if you look at an actual pumpkin, there are lines that run vertically that make it look like a pumpkin. And so what I have done here on the left actually doesn't resemble a pumpkin so much. It more resembles a more circular shape like an orange or an apple. So having gone through trial and error, I decided to make one using vertical double half hitch knots, and this is the result of that. You can see that the lines run vertically, so I did start off with the same pattern in the middle, and then I added more cords partway through, but you can see here there is even little bumps at the top in between the vertical lines, which closely resembles the actual shape of a pumpkin. And so with all of that And so with all of that said, for a more circular round shaped pattern, if you are making something that's more sphere, then using horizontal double half hitch knots is what works best for that. And then for other shapes that require more defined edges and details, I do recommend going with some vertical knots like the vertical double half hitch knot rows that I have on the pumpkin. This leads us into the third consideration on the details of the object. So as you can see from our little gum nut shaped object here, there are defined vertical lines running vertically on the object. And so with the macrame version of this, I had also added vertical double half hitch knot rows here to closely resemble the actual shape, lines, and the details of the object. The shape, the lines, and the details are all important considerations when designing and creating 3D macrame projects, especially if you want your macrame version to resemble the actual object as closely as possible. Once you have practiced designing and creating these projects enough times, you will be able to take any object and then make a macrame version out of it fairly easily. To incorporate the little details in your macrame version, you don't have to necessarily just use the knots to do that. You can do this with colored cords or through the use of combining different knot patterns with your design as well. So say you're trying to mimic this leaf right here with some white lines on the outskirts of the leaf. You can also mimic this design by using two different colors for your macrame version of this by using a different color on the outskirts of the leaf. Or say you take something like this fairy foxglove flower, for example. You see these heart-shaped petals here, and that's a specific detail I wanted to incorporate into my petals here to mimic that look. And as you can see, there's that little dip in the middle of these petals to form that heart-shaped pattern. It is slightly easier to make an object that has sharper edges like a cube because you can just make the sides first and then weave them together. Whereas if you have a round object or a round object with an odd shape, the best way to go about making something like this is to add cords when you can and then slowly take away cords in accordance to the shape of your object to form a round or dome-like shape. To form this round-shaped pattern, what I did was I started in the middle and I added cords partway through to expand on the shape to make it a little bigger. Then as I got out further, I started taking away cords, which then automatically curves the pattern to the other side to form the round and dome-like shape. And this is also what I did for a slightly different pattern as well. I started in the middle and then I added cords to expand the project. And then at the end, to close off the dome-like shape, I took away cords one row at a time. Another tip to make the pattern curve is to limit the amount of spacing in between the knots. The tighter the knots and the closer they are together, the less room they have to stay flat and the more they will curve. So if you want something like this leaf to curve like an actual leaf, because an actual leaf doesn't always just stay flat, because of the natural shape of a leaf, it does have curves and bends to it, then you want to leave less space in between the knots. And how I do that is I always pull on the anchor cords and tighten up the knots so that there is less space forcing the pattern to curve. And then lastly, when you're starting off designing your own projects, always use the basic knots of macrame first before using more intricate knots or unique knots within your designs. The majority of your projects can be easily made with the three basic knots: the square knot, the double half hitch knot, and the lark's head knot, and the variations of these knots like the half hitch knot and the reverse lark's head knot. You can see the projects that I have here with the pumpkins and the leaves. These were all made with primarily double half-inch knot patterns. You can easily incorporate square knots as a part of your designs as well. As you can see with this petal here, there is a square knot in the center of the flower petals. To mount your cords, of course, the perfect knot for that would be the lark's head knot or the reverse lark's head plus half hitch, which is a knot we use a lot when we're trying to mimic the double half hitch knot. By using the reverse lark's head plus half hitch, it shows up as two little loops, and that is similar to what a double half hitch knot looks like. It can be super daunting coming up with your own macrame designs. That's why when you're starting to do this, it is best to keep it simple with the basic knots of macrame first. And then once you have a hold on how to design 3D objects, you can go and then incorporate more unique designs in your pieces. And that's a wrap on our guide on how to create macrame 3D designs. I hope you guys learned a new thing or two when it comes to creating your own macrame 3D designs. Some of these may apply to creating your own macrame designs in general, but for the most part, these will definitely help you when creating your own 3D designs that take a certain shape or form. Paying attention to the little details of your object, such as the direction of the lines and the little texture details of the object, can go a long way when it comes to designing your own 3D patterns. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you let me know in the comment section below, and also let me know what your favorite tip from the video was and what you think will help you out the most when designing your own 3D macrame projects. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys next time.